Hello, and welcome to my cellar for the 175th time that we're counting. All the rest of them, yeah. Anyway, you know the deal. Hi, this is the weekend of North Texas RPG Con. So far, neither one of the two games I've had scheduled, I have two more coming, have had enough players to actually play in. So I understand, I mean, hey, I wouldn't play in a virtual game if I could go there either. And I understand it's a little on the pricey side. So, no ego here, not a problem. Let's, don't have a whole lot of comments tonight. We'll see how long we can make this one last. Where did Gary, if it was Gary, get his inspiration for the different schools of magic? Abjuration, alteration, conjuration, summoning, enchantment, charm, greater divination, illusion, invocation, evocation, necromancy, and lesser divination. That's an interesting level of detail you don't see in most magic systems at the time. Well, actually, there weren't any other magic systems at the time. But yeah, I get your point by AD&D. The first clue, or the first answer to that, is Appendix N. There has been many pseudo-scholarly studies done on magic, what kinds of magic. Many writers from Dunsany to, I'll pick one, Silverberg, have written about types of magical spells and what is necessary to do them. It's studying the nature of a science or a craft that doesn't exist. So you can play fast and loose with the guidelines here. But when you think about it, alteration. What is the spell of alteration? You make one thing look like another. You make something that was something else into another. Cleaning water, is that alteration? Making it fit to drink, making it potable. Different writers have taken different approaches to how magic actually works, what's being done. Invocation, evocation, okay, invoking something, evoking something. They both have a distinctive energy action to them. Magic isn't just magic. And the identification, putting them into schools, if you will, greater divination, lesser divination, that just kind of followed a logic. Now, to be honest, I'm pretty sure this is purely Gary's. It would be more likely that Gary's mind, his approach would be to categorize and classify and everything. That was the kind of nitpicking detail that Gary really loved, was categorizing and statting and charting. Yeah, there's a lot of different things there, but we also, by identifying those different types, have given the DM a whole different set of tools that, he can use. I'm drinking caffeine to stay awake, so I'll be hiccuping and burping. In that, if you set up a ward in a chamber or an area or something, you could ward against different types of spells, not all spells. But invocation and evocation didn't work because this area has a unique sound deadening quality, that the sound doesn't go any further The vibes don't go any further. The utterances don't go any further. Just there was tons of possibilities there. Um, if anything, the early game offered too many possibilities to try things out, and was probably pretty confusing in that regard because there are just so many things that we took a handful of pasta and threw it at the wall. There was some rigatoni stuck here and some spaghetti stuck there, and it just yeah, it was confusing. But if you again, it goes back to Appendix N and the various ways magic has been used and treated by different writers. What were they doing? What were they abjuring? What were they trying to alter? Maybe you have a knack for a certain type. How would you describe a sky cloud adventure? Oh, here we go. Yep, blood sugar's going. How would I explain a sky? Would some of the clouds have the core of solid ground, or is the adventure only accessible for characters who can fly? Maybe a floating fortress in the clouds. What about an NPC that's a hawk man, a raven man, or an eagle man? Well, okay, those can all make those can make foes or friends, either way. As it happens, I've written, though not formally published yet, an adventure that takes place in the sky called the Castle of Glass. And it all takes place in this floating glass orb, very large glass orb, that floats up in the sky. And to access it, well, it doesn't start out high in the sky. It starts out down low where you can actually access it and get into it. Once you get in, you find that the beings that used to populate this apparently could levitate or fly because there's no staircases anywhere, and yet it's comprised of distinct levels through the castle of glass, the sphere, and there are distinct levels that repeat themselves in different alignments, and they had no need for staircases because they obviously levitated. However, being the crafty writer that I am, I posited that at some point in the past they probably took slaves who didn't have that, so they would have had to provide them with some sort of means of traveling up and down the central core of this big round glass sphere fortress thing. And so I had, I believe they were shoes of levitation. And of course, being the evil, sadistic bastard that I am, every time I ran that adventure, they, of course, got dumped upside down and everything fell out of their pockets until they mastered the balance of the shoes. I had a lot of fun at their expense. But hey, isn't that what DMs, aren't we entitled to that once in a while? I don't know, if you're going to go adventuring in the sky, obviously you have to have a way to get there. Belt of levitation, ring of flying, whatever. There's many ways you can do that. I only had a zero gravity, so to speak, in a confined sphere. It wasn't actually zero gravity, but there was no way to get. Well, actually, it was the opposite of zero gravity. You were stuck on the bottom, and there were more levels up above. And so, obviously, you have to. If you're going to plan an adventure in the sky, you've got to figure out. Oh, pardon me. I know that's rude. I'm so sorry. You have to figure out a way to enable your player characters to be able to participate in it. Otherwise, all they're going to do is go, oh, yeah, there it is. And while they stand on the ground, unable to do anything. Assuming you find time to play D&D these days, what is your favorite character class to play? Well, let me ask you this. Where are we? Is it an outdoor adventure? I prefer to be a druid or a ranger. Actually, a druid. I'm very I lean very heavily toward druids. Gee, I wonder why. Something about a village called Hamlet or something in one of my past lives. Anyway, if I was outdoors, I'd want to be a druid. If I was underground, I'd probably want to be. I don't. What would I want to be? Well, if I had the opportunity to play a high level character, I'd certainly be a magic user. Otherwise, I'd probably play a cleric. You get to bash crap, but you also get to do good things. And in my world, the way it works with prayers and not spells, etc., etc. So I can't give you a flat out answer. It's all situational. Where are we playing? What are we doing? That goes back to the days when we had stables of characters. Where are we going? What are we doing? This guy's probably the best fit. Old school. All right. Okay, we were talking last week about overbearing players. Try to dominate the group and everything. This person had a great suggestion. Have your group roll initiative to determine non-combative decisions such as what to do in town or which hallway to choose. This puts everyone in a queue of who decides what and when they do something. When you're boisterous player, boisterous being a very nice substitute here for the type of play it probably is. When your boisterous player blurts out his remark, kind of reminding me that he does not have the initiative to decide yet, or that his player has already decided his action, and you are awaiting the decisions of the next. Once everyone gets the opportunity to speak freely in a structured sequence, then no one feels left out. Good decision or idea from a shy or novice player will come to light. Excellent point. And this will give your hushed players a greater immersion into the collaborative efforts of the game's direction by virtue of their increased participation, and it will bridle your your destroyer from running amok with a party in tow. Use as often as necessary until he takes the saddle. Very good metaphor. Yeah, that's a great way to do it. I have, especially at conventions, where it tends to, especially when all the players don't know each other in a given group that have signed up, somebody always wants to be a horse's ass and dominate, who isn't necessarily the best qualified to do it. When that happens, I have a different technique as well, and that is, I go around the table, literally. What are you doing? What are you going to do? What do you think? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Every person is called on. Everybody has a chance to put forth their ideas. And when that player answers out a turn, no, not your turn yet. I haven't asked you yet. Chill. Another way to do it. Now, the only problem I can see with the rolling for initiative, if he got to go first and he propounded on his great ideas, he'd probably want to argue with everybody else who came up with a different idea. I don't know. That's a possibility. It depends how much of a dick this player is. It really does. What is his dick factor? How can we ever get the Keotum's ointment launcher functional if we can't figure out hit points? Yeah, well, I don't like shooting people in the ass with gobs of petroleum jelly that actually cures you. But hey, that's just me. Did have a real question on darkness, 15-foot radius, or similar spells that kill all light. How did the old school treat darkness in regards to infravision? Infravision isn't regular sight. Infravision sees on a different spectrum, not affected. They're not the same. Normal sight requires light to bounce off the cones and the rods, and all that thing. And in our mind's eye, we see that thing and just getting ready to bite down and eat us. Whereas if it was in the dark, we wouldn't see it before it ate us unless we had infravision, in which case we'd see some big hot thing, and it'd swallow it and it'd bite us and we'd die. some of this is when you're trying to figure out what negates what, it's common sense. What is infravision? Infravision's infrared. It studies heat signatures. Regular sight is sight, not hot, not cold, not, whatever. Um, Keep in mind, you illusionists out there, that illusions don't give off heat. No, they don't. No, they don't. And I've had people look at in years past in adventures, someone's looked at something with infravision, and of course they ask, "Is it giving off heat?" And of course I have to answer, "No, it's not." And so then they know the game's afoot. Something's up. We always treated darkness affected visible light only, and infravision could see within its radius, but not through it. Okay, it's pretty much the way I play it. Not through it. That's interesting. That's interesting. Kind of a cloud. Yeah, might try it. Okay. Watch what you ask for is what the lesson is for the next one. If you remember back a couple episodes, somebody said we were talking about encumbrance or whatever, and guy had a funny story and then he didn't put it on. And so he came back and said, "Well, I thought you didn't like to hear about people's con adventures all the time, so here it is anyway." So I'm going to give you it's really big. It's a whole page long. Well, you can't see that because of the glare, but trust me, it really is a whole page long. And, well, it's 14-point type, so I can read it without readers. Okay. Party of 6 novice adventurers adventured into the ruins of Castle Mistamere near their hometown. On the ground level of the ruins, they had slaughtered the resident kobolds and other unfriendly creatures. Now they descended some old stone steps into the dark chambers below. Here the party encountered nests of various giant beetles, most of which tried to eat the intruders. Wounded but confident of their eventual success, the adventurers set up camp where they were, organized watches, and rested to heal themselves. Then came wandering undead skeletons and zombies, and yet more skeletons and zombies. Gradually the adventurers were worn down by battle after battle, with some of them so wounded they lapsed into unconsciousness. This would, of course, require more healing time than expected. The party's lamp oil and torches were almost all used up, so they switched to relying on the natural light from fire beetle glands. Good thinking. I like this. Then those two began to dim, so the party members who were still conscious got even more creative. They made a campfire, and since there was no firewood down there, they gathered the corpses of the vanished giant beetles, skeletons, and zombies. And as DM, I was reduced to calculating how many minutes of light each kind of corpse would provide. Many corpses were burned that night, like dozens. Fortunately, the constant stream of wandering skeletons and zombies provided an ample supply. Also, fortunately, the adventurers had enough rations, so they didn't have to get creative about food. Unfortunately, the adventurers and the DM had overestimated their abilities, and they gradually fell, one by one, wounded and unconscious. As DM, I chose to use a Deus Ex Machina to save the party, and then that's another story. We now know very well from personal experience the wisdom of finding a safe place before trying to rest. Yeah. Yeah, don't you just love those adventures? We just can't keep giving them. And see, I don't write an adventure without setting a mood and a tone. For instance, in this case, where wave after wave after wave, I would have written to do that. I would have written in that they were relentless, that they were unceasing, as long as they sensed the warmth of the living bodies, they would keep attacking in waves, whatever. I wouldn't just decide to do that. But I'd probably write it every time. Okay. A world with those giant prehistoric creatures mixed with all the dragons, the mean devils and demons, the giants, the high-level evil wizards, the venomous giant bugs, etc., and all sorts of tough monsters especially, are priceless for challenging the power gamers who want totally larger-than-life, over-the-top superhero powers and the high-level, rough-shot, surreal gonzo style. It's a style for people who can appreciate mad, lurid, comical hyperbole. To borrow an old Hunter S. Thompson quote, one of my absolute favorite authors of all times, no explanation, no mix of words or music or memories can touch that sense of knowing that you were there and alive. At one's first adolescent punk kids D&D congregation of 5 or 6 fellow nerdy 11 through 15-year-olds sometime in the 80s. Words can't describe recreating that feeling and joy of fudging and pencil whipping a bunch over the top of larger-than-life epic-level characters. Usually all the 6 stats would be in the range of 16 to 24 with psionics, minimum level 13, quite often double multi-class, if not triple. Okay, we get the point here, sure. Over the top, you needed that kind of stuff. You needed it. I don't know if you've heard this story before. One of the reasons that we put out gods, demigods, and heroes, during that period of the game's development and growth and expansion and what have you, we used to trade off at TSR, me, Gary, and Brian, on who had to answer the mail that month. You know, the self-addressed stamped envelopes that had a big question, you know, how do you do this, what do you do that, how many eggs can a hippogriff, does a hippogriff lay, you know, the things like that. I once famously replied to a question that, how fast can a dwarf run an armor, and I wrote back, and he can't run it all if it's horse barding. But, you know, we weren't often cruel like that. So we got a letter one month, and it was my month to read it. And came in, and this DM was lamenting, and he really, it was really, they weren't pulling our leg or anything like this. He wanted to know what could he possibly prepare for his group next. This past weekend, they had decided they were going to go to Valhalla. They crossed the Bifrost Bridge, killed all the Valar, destroyed the bridge, and ended up killing basically the Norns and the entire Norse pantheon. And I'm reading this, and I'm going, are you shitting me? This guy's got to be pulling my leg. He's got to be pulling my leg. And come to find out, he wasn't. This really had happened in his game. So Gary came into work, or he was already there, and I got done reading it. And so I said, Gary, you gotta check this out. And so I read the pertinent passages to him, and he just his jaw dropped farther and farther as I read on. And you know, he first goggled when he heard about killing all the Valar, and it just got, you know, and Fenrir and and he was just agog when I got done. And so then it was like, you know, how many hit points do they think Odin has? My God. So in the context of what we perceived as topping out human, you know, people's character level, we gave Odin, you know, like 300 or 400 hit points or something like this, trying to point, and we did this with all the pantheons, trying to point out the absurdity of going to Valhalla and killing all the Norse pantheon. Now, the Iron Druid and American Gods are recent examples of just that thing trying to be done. So that's part of the reason we put out Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. Like, whoa, wait a minute, slow up here a little bit. You can't possibly have more than 60, 70 hit points, even at, you know, the best progression, yada, yada, average rolls. And you're going to tell me that you took out Odin with his 300, plus all his special abilities and that. So that was an attempt to damp down the wild power gaming that was going on. All right, the last topic. I've heard that Gary didn't normally use the original method for rolling abilities, 3d6 down the line. Well, being a smartass, you probably didn't hear it, but you probably possibly read it. Gary's been dead a few years. And I was his friend, so I can make light of it. And that's reflected in the multiple methods in the DMG that allow for characters with higher abilities on average. What method do you usually use, and how mechanically useful are high ability scores in your game? For example, pre-Greyhawk strength, which only modifies fighters' experience and maybe ad hoc rulings on how much someone can lift. Or do you add mods to melee from strength, or even 18 percentage in strength out of the Greyhawk? Personally, I love the older approach because players won't fret out over having great stats or not, and the numbers are mostly there as a reference point for envisioning a character. I also love being surprised by the dice, and playing a flawed, weak character usually feels more exciting. Well, I certainly agree with that latter. It's much harder and much more fun, in my opinion, to play with a character that isn't all buffed out. Somebody that's got a real bad dump stat. Now, dump stats, not something that I like doing. I like going 4d6s, this is for strength. 4d6s, this is for intelligence. 4d6s, this is for this. No dump stat. Dump stat is the one that karma, fate, the roll of the dice gives you. I've actually seen, in all my years of playing, I've actually seen 2 18 double odds. I probably haven't seen more than 15 18s. Now, I'm sure there's more out there, but I'm talking about with all the people I've played, all the games I've played in over the years, etc. I have no problem giving bonuses for the incredibly rare occasion that you might actually get an 18 naturally. And I don't care if you rolled 4d6s and 3 of them came up 6s and you took that. Okay. What do high numbers do for my game? Well, my game is old school, and so if you're going to do something that requires dexterity and balance and agility, I would tell you to roll against your dex, your dexterity. The higher your dex, the more chance you're going to have to roll below it. But even with an 18, there's still 19 and 20. That's the effect it would have in my game. When the game was first posited in Gary's mind, and Gary and I have had this conversation several times over the years, he was naive enough to think that, well, he was, I guess naive isn't even the word. The whole concept of power gaming did not exist. Gary came from the other 2 forms of gaming, the 2 that existed prior to role playing. That's miniatures and board games. And there's no way in miniatures or board games that you can stack advantages to your, stack numbers to your advantage. Now in miniatures you can take favorable terrain that'll, give you a longer cannon shot or whatever, but I think you see where I'm going here. Most part, if you're playing a 7 Years' War miniature battle, there were no units on there that had all, great big buffed up stats and just mowed everybody down around you. They if it was a guard unit, it fought as a guard unit. If it was a line unit, it fought as a line unit. So there wasn't a precedent, and there wasn't a forebear of privilege of any kind coming out of minis or boards. The only board game I can think of that has privilege would be checkers, because if you get all the way to the other side, you become a king, and now you just raise hell all over the board. It's tougher playing flawed characters that have a low stat. Even the pre-gens that I give out for Wheel of Blame and others, nobody has great stats all the way across. Everybody's got something that they gotta play around, cover up that weakness, keep that weakness from being noticed or exploited, or that deficiency, or that stat that just isn't, just isn't nearly as high as you would have liked it to have been. Live with it. The easiest one to live with is crappy charisma. So if you were going to play dump stats and just roll numbers and then decide which characteristic, which stat to assign them to, yeah, it's easy to take charisma as a dump. You're not, you're an adventurer, pardon me, I'm doing that again. You're not an adventurer when you're trying to con somebody or sweet talk somebody in. Now, that's not to say if you have a high charisma, and you can avoid a combat by means of coercion and persuasion, that's always the wisest thing to do. And at the end of the night, as a DM, I give you the same amount of credit for that, or same amount of experience for that creature that you talked your way out over, that evil guy, and that is if you'd killed him, or almost as much, because he was the obstacle and you overcame it. That's how I would do it. That's why I would do it that way. Nothing going on now for quite some time, for me anyway. There's a place over in Indianapolis, called Donuts and Dragons. And I'm trying to get a hold of the management to see about coming over and running a, hey, come, let's all play games at Donuts and Dragons. And I'll sign stuff if you want to bring it or whatever. Just draw a crowd there, and I'll have a good time, eat some donuts, and play some games. So I'm checking it out. I'll let you know. If anybody there has an interest in, or knows anyone who has an interest in little race cars, let me know. I have amassed over the years a very large collection of Ideal, was the original company that made them, TCR, Total Control Racing, slotless race cars in HO scale, about like that. They shift gears and go from lane to lane. They don't have slots. You can still knock them off the track and smash them into the wall, but it's a little more difficult to do it. Anyway, I have a ton of it. I'm guessing at least 125, 150 cars of all the marks, enough track to cover a basement, all the accessories, all that kind of stuff. I want to move the whole. I'm tired of it. I don't have any great grandbabies. All the older ones are girls and have already told me they have no interest whatsoever in Grandpa's race cars. So might as well get rid of them. They completely take up all the space underneath my pool table. So if you know anybody, let me know. Look them up. Ideal TCR. They were the cats. They were it in the late 70s, early 80s. They got so the Mark IV got so sophisticated. It had a rotating gearbox in the rear end. Really, really incredible stuff. Anyway, I'm going to get rid of them. I'll find somebody somewhere. In the meantime, get together and game. If you don't feel comfortable without a mask, then wear a mask. It's my understanding that they've been asked to all wear masks in Texas. by Doug. Whether or not that happens, I have no way of knowing. But I wish I was there in Texas. I'm not. Oh, Mud Puppy Games, which is the business that Jim Wampler has announced the beginning of a new project. They are going to be selling PDFs of all 13 issues of Adventure Gaming Magazine. I believe the first 5 are available now on Drive-Thru-RPG. So, Adventure Gaming was the magazine that I came to Cincinnati to do in conjunction with some of the people at Ralpartha. They funded and backed me, and it lasted 13 issues, and then it sank in a welter of confusion during Reaganomics. We didn't go down but owing a couple of grand, but there were a ton of small mom and pop businesses that went out of business during that period of time, and a disproportionate share of them were hobby shops, and a disproportionate share of them were my distribution. So after losing my shirt for a couple of episodes, I folded it up and quit. But we had some great writers, wrote about some great games, had a great article about Titan, still one of the more interesting board games you'll ever run across, a fantasy board game, a completely unique movement system. Well, I've babbled on enough for tonight, so I will wrap it up here and say, Dodada Govi. Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.